It's time to sit down and relax for the good, the bad, and the sequel Q&A with your host, Doug.
Hey there, Doug here. So last week's sequel was Caddyshack 2, and as promised this week, I am interviewing someone who was involved in the film, and for the first time, we have a non-actor, a man of many talents behind the camera, Tim Lawrence. Tim had some amazing stories and worked on so many classic movies, you won't believe it until you hear the stories. And right from the beginning, I could tell Tim was a great guy, and probably thinking, how can you tell how great of a guy is right from the beginning of a phone call? Well, my 3-month-old daughter, Emerson, wanted to get involved with the interview, and some people would have been like, oh great, this guy has a baby crying, being loud. Nope. Tim made me feel super comfortable and said, is she a big fan? Then he told me how he and some friends were in a band in his hometown of Jacksonville and really the beginnings of him going to Hollywood. So I'm going to start right around there so you can miss some of the baby crying. I couldn't get that audio out, so sorry for that. But definitely enjoy stories about everything from Thriller to Ghostbusters and to, of course, Caddyshack 2. Stay tuned after to hear the trailer for next week's sequel. Enjoy.
Yeah, I went out to California and worked in audio animatronics for a couple of years. And then one day, the great Saturday, it's about 11 in the morning, the phone rang. And it was Rick calling. He said he'd been talking with John Landis about this Michael Jackson video called Thriller with some zombies and a transformation in it, and could I start Monday? Sure, Rick, happy to.
Yeah.
And that wasn't the end of the good day, because a couple of hours later on the same day, the phone rang again. This time it was Stan Winston. He also wanted me to start work Monday on something called Wishman, and I told him I'd just taken the job with Rick, and he said, oh, that's great, I'm sure you'll do well. If you ever have downtime, give me a call, I'm sure there'll be something to do. And I did wind up working with him on Aliens and Invaders from Mars for a little bit.
Oh, wow.
And that's how the Hollywood stuff started. It was back in I went out in like 1980, and in 1982 I got on a night crew for model work on Jaws 3 and made some molds and sculpted the big cartoon octopus for the amusement park. And then later I got I guess it was the following year that Thriller came up, and then it just went on from there. I worked Baker's Shop and ILM for the 80s.
That's awesome. And when you started, it was just you and your band, just your passion for it, or did you have some kind of background in doing the mold, or you just learned everything on the fly?
When I was here in Jacksonville, I was fascinated by the mold process, and I was always experimenting with plaster, and I got into fiberglass a little bit. My molds weren't great, but I had a lot of hands-on experience. And then when I moved out to California to work in animatronics, I was working in the custom tooling and plastics department, where I learned a great deal about how to properly make the molds, and that was very useful to Rick. I remember when we were working on Thriller, and he gave me the first Catman sculpture to mold, and I began to make the mold on it, and I was putting the splash coat on, and he walks up behind me and starts digging his finger into my rib, saying, now don't screw this up, this is my sculpture. So I made the mold and finished it, and when the mold was finished, he said, you're the only one making molds on my sculptures. So that was a good thing.
That's awesome. And then and then you were doing some makeup, and they were was it planned for you to be in the music video?
It was not planned, and I should say up front that I'm not a makeup artist. The only makeups I ever did in Florida were a couple of really simple latex slip zombie cheek things. So I was not a makeup artist. I was more a fabricator with foam. So the only makeup I ever did in Hollywood was the Tor Johnson makeup, and that came about because it turned out when we were shooting Thriller, we weren't going to get the dancers until 3 days before the shoot, so they couldn't have elaborate makeups on them. We had small, medium, and large bags, and we would fit the dancers and use Flexacryl to make some pre-made teeth fit them, and they all had little bags with their stuff in it. And then John Landis said, to Rick, why don't you have your crew be zombies? So everybody got to make their own zombie, and I chose to do Tor Johnson. I said I wanted to do Tor Johnson, and Rick said, okay, go for it. So I did that, and John Landis liked it so much, you'll see my zombie in Thriller more than any other zombie except Michael, because he kept saying, where's Tor? And he'd stick me in the background or off to the side. I remember one night late, we were working, and the executive producer, George Folsey, who's also John's editor, came in and said, John, you know there's someone in your video looks just like Tor Johnson? So that was a lot of fun.
Yeah,
Thriller is the most fun I ever had in Hollywood, because it was my first big job in Hollywood. It was my first job with Rick. I was the first hire on the job. It was just me and Rick for the first week as I cleaned up the shop and got it stocked. And it was a compressed experience of the whole movie-making process, because in 6 weeks, we got the job, we did the designs, we made the stuff, we got the shoot, and then 2 weeks after we finished the shoot, it was in the theaters because John wanted it to qualify for a Short Film Academy Award. So it was just amazing to go through that couple of months, just that whole thing. And let's see, and like 2 weeks after that wrapped, Mark Wilson, who I'd worked with together on Thriller, had gone on to Boss Film in Marina Del Rey to work on Ghostbusters. And they were getting close to needing to shoot the terror dogs, the big puppets, on the steps of the Temple of the Gozer. And he said, we need some puppeteers. Can you come down and be a puppeteer? So I went down, auditioned, got a position. So that's myself and Mark Wilson are in the Longhorn dog, the one she pats on the head when she walks down the stairs. Mark's in the front and I'm in the back.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and that was cool. That was a lot of fun. So that was like my first year in Hollywood was Thriller and Ghostbusters. So that's
a pretty good
cool
start.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an amazing start. If you look at when Thriller has like that, there's different photos if you just type Thriller into Google Images, and there's one, it's like a movie poster, and you're right there.
Yeah, I was on the cover of the release video for 25 years until the reissue, and they put a different picture up. But I was on the cover of the video for decades.
Yeah, that's a staple for Halloween. Every Halloween party I've ever gone to. That song.
People are always asking me, do you dance? Can you do the Thriller dance? No.
Yeah. Be like, I don't do it anymore. I showed Michael how to do it.
That's good.
Yeah. Well, that's great. And then it seems like, again, I know there's some things that you did, like Ghostbusters isn't even on your IMDb, so I'm sure there's a lot of things I'm going to skip over. And then it seems like right after that, you were on Dumbo Circus, and you're the puppet designer for all of that?
Yeah, I sculpted all the heads for the main characters out of water clay and made, I think, 8 anything Muppets with replaceable features. That part was very disappointing for me because I thought those turned out extremely well. But by the time the second show was filming, I was off on to Cocoon at that point, and that was turned over to set people, and they had no idea how to make faces on those puppets. So when I see these shows, I say, what is going on there? Those puppets look terrible because the eyes are on the side, the noses are upside down in the wrong color, and the ears are weird, and it's like, oh, man. Well, but that's how it goes. You don't have control over this stuff. You make it, and someone else takes over.
Yeah, and then Cocoon, that was a classic.
That was a great.
I saw some of those photos, yeah.
That was a Greg Canham show, but it was originally a Rick Baker show, as was my science project, but Rick withdrew from those projects for personal reasons and turned Cocoon over to Greg and my science project over to Doug Beswick, and that was the T-Rex that walks into the gym. So I worked on both of those. I worked on Cocoon and I worked on my science project. For Greg, I made a bunch of fiberglass molds of the aliens and injected them with a hot melt vinyl so they could glow from within. Wow. And on my science project, I made a bunch of plaster molds for the dinosaur. I remember me and Sean McEnroe working day and night for like 3 days to get them done, and was a puppeteer. I puppeteered the tail on set for that. Wow.
And then I'm sure that I'm going to skip over something, but this is like one of my favorite movies ever. But I think I have a shirt of it. I had the poster for Howard the Duck. I don't know why. At a young age,
Howard the Duck.
I just love that movie. I don't know why. It's just
It gets a bad rap. A lot of excellent work went into that, but it disappointed a lot of people because it just didn't meet their expectations of the comic.
Yeah, and
that was my first violin job. I remember when that started, I got a call to go up and be a puppeteer, but I was working with Dave Miller on Night of the Creeps, and I didn't want to walk out on him, so I stayed on that till I was done. I was making these 5 splitting heads that worms had to come out of. And when I got done there, then I went up to Island for Howard the Duck, but they'd already filled the puppet position, so they said, we want you to create Duck World. They had made for Howard 10 fully animatronic puppets. They had 10 of them. So I was tasked with taking those 10 puppets and turning them into 10 different characters for the opening Duck World sequence, all of Howard's neighbors. So I made moles off of a duck head that had had the bill removed. So that was my starting plaster life cast, was a plaster cast of Howard's head with the bill having removed, exposing the underskull. And then I sculpted 10 character bills onto that and made molds so that I could glue on to these different puppets, these different bills, an old duck and some ethnic ducks and just different, some female ducks. I remember making a shower duck for Debbie Carrington to wear naked in a tub. I remember one day they were considering Robin Williams for the voice, and he came in on Saturday when I was there, and I had all these sculptures laid out ready for molds, and he just started doing all these different voices for all the different duck characters. So that was funny.
Wow. And what character was he going to do the voices for?
He was going to do Howard's voice. He was being considered. They considered lots and lots of people.
Wow.
The story I heard for how Chip Zion got the job was there was some Hollywood party that Gloria Katz and Willard Hike were at, and Chip Zion was telling some story with a voice, and Gloria shouts, "There's our Howard!" And
wow.
Zion became the voice.
Wow.
And then I was on second unit with Tom Wright and the Ultralight for Howard puppeteering. There were 3 of us on radio controls for his face. It wasn't, who was it? Who was on there? It was me, Lisa Sturz, and I can see the guy and I know his name, but I've just blanked on it. He was a Henson puppeteer, and I can't think of his name right now. It's driving me crazy. Anyway, that was Howard, and I remember literally the day before we were going to start shooting Duck World. Oh, and we had made these really nice feathered wigs for all these different characters. I had made these vacuum-formed thin foam caps that you could punch feathers into, and had this guy, I think his name was Brewer, did all of this fantastic detailed work in making all these different kinds of hairstyles out of feathers, crew cuts and comb-overs and just all kinds of things. So I come in early on that day to get the puppets ready, and Willard's there before me kind of looking at it, and he says, "Tim, this stuff is great, but I've decided Howard's neighbors need to look just like him." So they didn't use any of my puppets. They just used the wigs. So like 6 or 7 months of work just didn't get used.
Oh.
And that happens all the time. Stuff goes into crates all the time. You do all this work, and for whatever reason, it doesn't get used. More stuff doesn't get used than does get used.
That can be rough, but at least you're still able to contribute to it, and you were doing the radio controls. Now, how does that work? Is it just knowing, is there a voice doing, like was Chip on set, doing the voice from like maybe off camera, and you had to move it to manipulate it at the same time, or?
We were connected with head radios so we could hear him, and was it Tim Robbins? I'm trying to remember who the puppeteer was on second unit. He would do the voice. He had a special control to control the bill, to lip sync the phonetics and the script passages, and then I would be on brows and Lisa would be on eyes, and it's an ensemble performance. It's puppeteering. It's something you rehearse, and you know how the face needs to move, and you just do it in concert. I mean, it's just something that happens. That's the way we did Harry. He also had a radio-controlled face, and there was a crew of 3 of us, and we created those facial expressions. And that's how that is done. But it's all real time.
That's amazing. It's just an artwork. It's like watching synchronized swimming or ballet. Like everything has to be so perfect.
You have to know your crew. You have to be able to work together, and you all get together and talk about it. So this is what we're going to do, and this is what we're going to play off of, and you lead this one, or I'll lead this one, and that, the brows will lead this time. The eyes will lead this time, and that's just minor detail. It's usually not even that detail because we go over the scripts, we run through it, we look at it and say, okay, that's what we're going to do, and off we go.
That's great. That's so awesome. And then your next film, again, I'm just going by what I have in front of me, and you just mentioned was Harry and the Hendersons. Yeah,
you missed Starman. That's one of my favorites.
Starman? What was that?
John Carpenter's Starman. You familiar with that one? Yeah, the star baby. Yeah, the star baby in the beginning, the little glowing baby that starts the Jeff Bridges transformation that Karen Allen walks up on. So yeah, worked on making the baby, made the molds, made the hot melt skins, and it was a day of shooting. That was the first time I'd met Dick Smith too, and shook hands with his 3-fingered hand. But I got to spend all day on set with Karen Allen in her underwear, which was kind of cool. She had a robe on for some of it, but she's a professional.
Yeah, I got to check that movie out, Starman.
It's an excellent movie. It's really good. It's really good. Recommend it to anyone who hasn't seen it.
Yeah. And you got to work with John Carpenter. That's awesome.
Yeah. None of that was very close. He would work through an AD, and he'd work through Rick, so there wasn't a lot of close contact with John, but he was there and knew us and would talk to us.
Yeah, I love Karen Allen.
Oh, I do too. Yeah, she's
Scrooge, great. Animal House. Yeah, she's great.
Raiders.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Yeah, and then the next film, it's about in the same year, but we'll start with Beetlejuice first. But that was amazing. Some of those photos, those little clay models that you had, and the step-by-step of the transformation was unbelievable.
That was a unique experience for me because what got me interested in movies and how they were made is Ray Harryhausen stop motion. I saw 20 Million Miles to Earth when I was a kid on a black and white set with my dad, and I just never forgot it. It didn't look like anything else I had ever seen before, and really got into the stop motion fan part and making little models. But when I met Rick Baker, the emphasis changed because in his words, because he kind of went the same path that he said he discovered that with makeup he could get much more immediate response instead of having to wait for the film to come back. He could bloody up a neighbor and scare the neighbor's mom. So we went that direction too. We went the direction of makeup, and I got out to Hollywood and was not even really thinking about stop motion, but I got into a partnership with a buddy of mine, Ted Ray, who's working on Game of Thrones now, and he was a big stop-motion guy, and when Beetlejuice was being shopped around town by Alan Monroe to break the effects out among a bunch of shops to get it as cheap as possible, Ted got the banister snake and said, you should talk to Tim about this transformation. And they had been talking to the Kyoto brothers and Carl Surgis about doing claymation, but they had done that in Pee-wee. And Tim wanted more control over this than you got with that kind of claymation, because you set the camera up, you stop, and when it's over, it is what it is. So they wanted more control, and I got the job. I told them how I would do it, and Rick Heinrich did pencil animation of the scene, showing how it was to proceed and what the angle was going to be, and that's how it started. And I first had to make the decision, how big is all this stuff going to be? And we decided on quarter scale. So the first thing was to sculpt 2 quarter scale portrait likenesses of Gina Davis and Alec Baldwin. So I did those, got those approved, and then made molds on those 2 things. I also, before I did those sculptures, I had made busts without heads for the Gina character, and I made a bust without a head for the Baldwin character and made molds of those. So I sculpted the portraits each on those blank busts and then made a mold of that. So once I had done that, I made clay copies, 5 clay copies of each, and those were going to be the key frames for the scene, the beginning, the middle, the end, and 2 in-betweens. So I sculpted the very first head is just a portrait, and then the next one starts the transformation, and then there's the middle of the transformation, the almost finished transformation, the finished transformation. So now there are these 5 sculpts of these extremes for both characters. So now there are 10 sculptures. Now I make molds on all 10 of those. And when I pour the clay, I stick a blank plaster bust into the mold so that the heads are all on the same bust with the same base key. So now I have 10 molds of these extremes, and then those are all poured up. So now I have shelves on one wall where I'm starting to line them up. And so there's 5 copies of the portrait, and there's 5 copies of the middle extreme, and there's 5 copies of the end extreme, and then 5 copies each of the in-betweens. So now I've got it all blocked in. Now that I can stand back from them and look at them, I go in there with the clay and start filling in the transformation and get it all roughed in. And then we're shooting tests all through this to check the movement, to check how it fits with the block, to check how the arm animation is going to work. I need to stop for a minute, take a breath, and take a drink of water. Is that all right?
Oh, no problem. Take your time.
Yeah, give me a second here.
Yeah. No, that seems amazing. The transformations are so cool. And
so the other thing about this is I had the stage set up with a camera that could swivel between the 2 stages, the Gina stage and the Alex stage, so I could shoot one swivel camera and shoot the other one. But the way the blocks were set up was the only part that was replacement were the heads. From the neck down, it's traditional animation, and that was a fiberglass shell with miniature costume parts and ball and socket arm armatures. And the miniature costumes were wonderful, and they were made by a terrific talent named Lynette Johnson, now Lynette Eklund. Just really did excellent work miniaturizing those costumes. So now for each frame, you shoot the frame, you pull the bust out, put the next bust in, strap it in, and then proceed with the animation. And we would shoot multiple tests on this, and I shot it with black and white Kodak something, Ektachrome maybe, because I could get 1 hour processing on that. And so for 36, 40 frames, I could shoot a test of both of them in a day, run that over to Eagle camera, and wait and get my test back, and then go and look at it and check it out. And so we would proceed in that direction. And once I had gotten all of the heads roughed in pretty well, I hired a guy, I think he had just gotten into town, a guy named Eddie Yang, to come in and assist, and he did all of the finish sculpting on the heads and did the teeth and sculpted the hands and did the paint, and was my best assistant on that. He did some wonderful work. And then as we started shooting it, first time we shot it on what is called shooting on ones, where you shoot one frame for one head, and that just went by too fast. So we shot it on 2s, and it was too slow and too straight through. So Rick made up some bar sheets where we would change up the frame rates. This will be a hold frame. This will be a 2-frame. The next 2 will be 1s, and he would just work this out and look at it until he was satisfied with it. And then we did the final shoot. It got approved and cut in. And that was, 5 months, I think, just on that.
Yeah, I bet. I did a little bit of claymation because I loved, growing up on, watching things like seeing in Beetlejuice, but Gumby, and so I would do it on a minimal scale. But no, that's amazing. And it does take that long to make something that came out that amazing.
No, it was a lot of fun. Well, it was a lot of fun in retrospect. It was a lot of work.
I'm sure Garrett,
I don't know if you've seen the pictures, but I had all of these things on shelves against a wall, kind of pushed against a wall.
Yeah, I saw them.
And one morning, I was woken up out of bed by an earthquake. And I thought, oh, my God. So I jumped into some jeans and got in the car and ran to the studio to see if I still had a job. And they were all on the shelves, but they had been pushed right to the edge. Like one more quarter of an inch, and they would have all been on the floor.
Wow.
Oh.
Wow. And then next we come to the reason why I reached out to you. And it's funny that, like, when I look up and down, it's not like I would have known your name. But then after, looking, because we decided we wanted to do Caddyshack 2, just looking at sequels, because some sequels get such a bad rap and you always want to find out, deep dive, don't compare it to the first one. That sort of thing is what we're doing. So once I clicked on your name, I'm like, oh, I hope this guy reaches back to me. Just looking at all the movies that you worked on that I loved and grew up on. But, so Caddyshack 2, you were the key puppeteer.
No, Steve Sleet was the key puppeteer.
Oh, okay.
He was the body and head, and I was the arms.
You were the arms, okay.
Yeah. Most of that was shot on sets at ILM of the tunnels built by the model shop there, headed by a guy named Lauren Peterson. He was really into organics, so everything was biodegradable. It was special glue. It was special dirt. It was
really?
Special everything, yeah. And there's so much stuff we shot in those tunnels that didn't make it into the movie. I've got, 4 videotapes of camera taps of all of our rehearsals and looking at the stuff. I haven't looked at it in years, though.
Wow. Do you keep a lot of that stuff? Do you keep any of
I used to. I got to tell you, when I moved back here from the West Coast because my parents were sick, I had 4 storage units packed with stuff, a lot of it. Hollywood mementos, just things I had saved from the movies I'd worked on and things people had given me. And then the times got rough, and I down to 1 storage unit now, but I don't think I kept anything, really, from Hollywood. I think I have 1 cap from Apocalypto, and that's it.
Oh, okay. But you have all those photos are amazing. So sometimes photos are just as good as having that object.
I'm fortunate, Doug, that I got out there at the beginning of the 80s, the very beginning of the great rubber monster rush, and I got connected with Rick Baker from the very beginning and just was fortunate to have worked on some really cool stuff all through the 80s, and also fortunate that there were some good pictures of it. So. Yeah.
No, definitely. Now, with Caddyshack 2, when you get approached with a job, were you familiar? I'm sure you watched the first one, right?
Oh yeah, I was a big fan of the first movie.
That's awesome. And now when you filmed all that stuff, do they give you the script and do you know who was going to be in the movie?
Oh yeah. We're involved pretty much from the beginning to familiarize ourselves with the script and have come up with ideas for gags and for bits and what would be a good or particularly funny way to do this and those kinds of things. How are we going to get the shot of him crawling into the baseboard? We'll take the head off and put a hand in from the neck and do it that way, and figure all that stuff out there on set. That's the thing about a lot of these is that the thought process, how am I going to say this? It's not always thought out in advance, so you're often on set making stuff up. I mean, not like Little Shop of Horrors, that wonderful Oz movie that Lyle Conway built the plant for. The Feed Me song, they spent 3 months shooting that, and they spent 3 months before that doing nothing except rehearsing every day. And when you have that kind of preparation and that kind of support, you just cannot beat the resulting performance. It's always going to be much more excellent than making something up.
Yeah. And now with Caddyshack 2, the puppet, I would say the gopher took on its own character in the second one. He was more animated. He was funnier, and he was talking more than he did in the first one. And I just thought it was really cool to have him, really come to life. He was like a main character in the movie.
I haven't seen it in so long, I have to say.
Yeah. Oh, no, it's okay. I just watched it not too long ago. And the only thing is it's funny when you look at the background on some of these sequels that we're doing, and they talk about, that was going to be Rodney in that role. And then there was a disagreement that he had, so then they brought in Jackie Mason. But it was just hard to replace. Like, if you watch that movie and think of Rodney saying all those lines and being in that character, then it's...
Well, when you think of Caddyshack, you think of Rodney Dangerfield and the Gopher, and maybe Chevy Chase.
Yeah. And it's so funny with that first one, Rodney was just supposed to have a few lines, but when he came onto set, Hal Ramis loved him, and they just wrote him in more and more, and that's such an amazing film, and that's great that you were able to be part of it.
In the first movie, the big conflict is between Bill Murray and the Gopher. In the second one, the conflict's between Dan Aykroyd and the Gopher. Which one did you like better?
Bill Murray.
Yeah, I got to go there too.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know
that scene we shot where the Gopher is digging into the golf bag, that was on set. I mean, that's lit to look like it's outside, but that's on set, and that's one of my favorite shots. I think that's particularly funny, of him digging into the bag.
No, that was great. No, Dan Aykroyd, he's a great actor, and I know you had the opportunity to work with him, like,
I think four times. I worked with him on Ghostbusters, Ghostbusters 2, Dragnet, and Caddyshack 2.
Oh, wow.
I was on the Dave Miller's crew with the big snake in the sewer.
Oh, okay.
Don't have any pictures from that yet, though.
No. But, so not too long after that, the next year, Ghostbusters 2. And you were actually in it, too, which is really neat. So you were able to... Yeah, did you build that?
That was another one of those days where the phone rings and my life changed. The phone rings and it's, "Hey, Tim, this is Dennis Murin." Okay, I had met Dennis Murin, and he was around on Howard the Duck and Caddyshack 2, but I didn't think he even really knew me. But here he is on the phone asking me if I'd be interested in coming up to work with him and run the creature shop on Ghostbusters 2. And asked if he could have a script sent over. And after I looked at the script, to call him back. And I said, sure. We had a nice conversation. I hung up. 5 minutes later, my doorbell rings. He already had it on its way when he was talking to me. They used to have a secondary office in Universal City called the Ed Company on Lancashire, and he just had a bite couriered over while I was on the phone with him. Now,
that's great.
The August 88, I think, version, and Slimer wasn't even in it. Slimer was not in the script at that time. The Scoleri brothers were in it, and that scene of the Scoleri brothers is probably the only thing in the script I saw that never changed. It stayed the same all the way through, and those were the first things designed, the first things approved, and the first things built were the Scoleri brothers. And that's another very good example of how if you plan more in advance and know more what you want, you get a better effect for a better price, because the way it was originally written, they were these huge characters stomping around the courtroom with their feet breaking through the floor and getting ground contact and electrical bolts, and they were supposed to be lip-syncing Italian epithets. So we designed them as suits and built them as big suits. And I said, I'm going to play Nunzio, and there was no problem with that. But as we went through production, they were more and more in the air, they were more and more on wires, and they were more and more covered with roto animation effects and more distorted with Mylar mirror gags. And if we had known that from the beginning, they could have been little rod puppets done in a water tank, and it would have been really cool. But we were stuck with the suits at that point, and that's just how it had to be.
Some of these photos that are so cool that you have on here, like with the Statue of Liberty, when she's getting ready to smash in the museum, and that photo of you is so cool.
Statue of Liberty, when Michael Gross was always saying to me under his breath, "Please make the statue work. Please make the statue work." But we had to have a casting session for someone to play the statue, so I had an open call, very narrowly described, tall, thin, this and that. So we had like 30 people come in, lots of women, and we'd go through. I had them, okay, what I want you to do is start on this mark, walk very slowly, and hold up your right hand. And after about the fifth one, people started laughing because they had figured out what was going on. This is the Statue of Liberty. They didn't know anything about the movie or that there was a statue, but it was pretty obvious what we were going for. And I was getting a lot of pressure from some production to hire this one particular girl. But I was focusing on a guy that I thought had a particular look to his walk, a particular quality to his gravity. This guy's name was Jim Fye. And I really wanted that guy. So I put him through special choreography, hit this mark, do that. Can you hear me when your head's covered with a helmet? Because you've got to be able to hear and see. So we have to, whenever anyone's wearing a suit, you never are able to see your feet. It's like walking downstairs with your eyes closed. It's a skill. You have to take your marks off of C-stands or tape marks on a board or something like that. So we went through that, and it worked out, so I cast Jim. It was always my decision who was going to be a ghost. Those were my decisions. So Jim was cast as a statue. And when we had not shot the Scalaries yet or finished building them, and we still didn't know who Tony was going to be. My original idea was, because I wanted Tony to be impossibly tall and skinny such that it couldn't be a guy in a suit, I had hired Mark Wilson to come up and build a prototype of a Japanese-style puppet built off his body. And we shot tests with that they liked, but they said the amount of roto to make this work is just not going to fit our schedule. So it had to be a guy in a suit for that reason. And then I auditioned again, and Alan Troutman I liked a lot for that. But then Ned Gorman, associate producer for ILM, line producer, came to me and said, we've already got Jim Fye on contract. And I went, ding, ding, ding. So, yeah, Jim became Tony Scolari right then. And because Jim was on contract, he also got to be the ghost jogger. So he played 3 ghosts in that movie.
Wow. And then a really cool thing that you put on one of those photos was that when they were doing the submission for the Academy, they included you on there and all of your names, which is really neat.
Was Dennis Murin did that. 9-time Academy Award winner Dennis Murin. We got along really well, and when it was over, he insisted that my name be included, and they had to remove the art director's name, Harley Jessup. But Harley Jessup's name was with Dennis is on the Abyss, which was always going to be the winner. So it wasn't a big deal. But I got to be on those big full-page ads for your consideration. There was my name with Dennis Murin. So I got my small recognition at Academy level, and that's plenty for me.
Yeah. And that's amazing if you think about it. Just, 8 years prior when you moved out there?
I was 29 when Rick hired me, and I was 32 or 33 when I got the Ghostbuster gig.
It's amazing.
And then Slimer, of course. Yeah,
Slimer was amazing looking. The photos of you in front of Slimer look so awesome.
That's a big story, the whole Slimer thing. Because it was, as I said, it wasn't in the original script at all. And then it was in the script, but with a small part. So, again, it was, I wanted to make it, I need to start even before that. Because by this time, there were essentially 3 Slimers. There was the monster from the first movie, there was the Saturday morning cartoon, and then there was Tom Enriquez's storyboard Slimer, which had a unique character that everybody loved. And I was tasked with combining all 3 of those into a single thing that production could approve. So I sculpted a maquette and pushed it around and said, okay, there's this little bit of cartoon in the face, and we still got the monster and the teeth and the claws, and we've got this wonderful fluid animatronic face, and we can get some of this Tom Enriquez stuff in, and got it approved, and we started to build it. And I cast a guy I'd worked with before who does a lot of stunt costume work named Bobby Porter, and he had recently worked with Tony Gardner on Mom and Pop Save the World, I think.
Oh, and Mom and Dad,
Yeah, and Tony had a body cast of Bobby, so we borrowed that to fabricate the suit on. And we built the suit. We built the costume. He was done. He was essentially finished and ready to go. And then Black Tuesday rolled around. That was the day we were told that Slimer was now out of the script and that we should let Bobby go. And the story I got one day in dailies down in Los Angeles, when they are checking out the first unit dailies, they would often at the end run ILM's silent special effects dailies. And there was a lot of Slimer stuff. And after viewing some of that in the dark, Mike says you could hear Bill Murray's voice. It's called Ghostbusters, not Slimer. And Slimer started getting cut out of the movie, and then he was just gone. So I said, please be real sure Slimer's out of the script, because if you let Bobby go and he takes another movie and you decide Slimer's back in, we're almost starting over. So they said, nope, Bobby's out, cut him. So, 2 weeks later, new script. Slimer's not only back in, but has an expanded role in this new relationship with Tully. So, we've got the suit, but nobody to wear it. So I go up with Ned again and say, we need an open call. Need to find someone rough height and weight and see how much of this we can fit on him. And Ned said, I work with this girl on Willow. Her name's Robin. I said, bring her in. So brought her in. She looked good for the role. She was real good height and real trim weight. And I said, okay, we need to do some mirror work and some choreography. So we went into a corner of the stage. Was it a corner of the stage? I think we went into a room, a dressing room with some mirrors, and did the mark choreography. Okay, do not look at your feet. Just look at this mark and do this turn, do this, and backwards. Because when you're on one of those raised stages, you have to trust everybody around you that you're not going to walk off the edge.
Oh, yeah.
So, and she did great, as you would expect a dancer to do. So I said, okay, we got to go to the creature shop now and see how much of this stuff fits you. So we took her over there, and Bobby's arms did fit her except for the fingers, so we had to redo the extensions, and Mark Siegel did that. The body pod fit. At some point I need to talk about Kamala Henneman, who I brought up to supervise the costumes because she's just an amazing fabricator. And then we had to make a head cast right then because the Slimer head, the animatronic, and then everything in there had to be refit, and that was a bit of a trick. That took a little while. But we got it done, in time for shooting, and we shot, and it is what it is. We shot so much more than got used because, again, Bill was getting a little itchy about how much Slimer there was, so we started getting cut out again. And by the time I left for Gremlins, there were only 3 shots left in the movie, and if we had shot... If production had gone on much longer, Slimer would have been completely removed again. And here's another thing about it. When we were coming up, not the end of the production, but we were well into production, Michael Gross and Ivan came to us and said, everybody's working weekends and late nights already. And they come up and say, is there any way we could up the schedule so we could open Ghostbusters 1 week ahead of Batman? And, of course, without any consultation, they said, sure, no problem. So everybody's working even harder now just to get this stuff cranked out. And they did have an excellent opening weekend that was completely erased by Batman the next week.
Yeah.
So I guess they did the right thing for their production.
Yeah. And what's great? Slimer, if you think about it, over the last, since you got and really kind of pushed for it, this is like the character you see in any ads, like even the Super Bowl. There was a Walmart ad, and it's not like you're going to have a Ghostbuster. It was Slimer driving the Ghostbuster mobile. Yeah, so it's pretty amazing.
Whenever we're talking about Slimer, we really got to give the lion's share credit to Steve Johnson because he invented that guy, in the first one. And they were using real comparatively primitive technologies and got some excellent results. And Mark Wilson, of course, is funny as hell in that.
Yeah, and then you said, moving on to the next one, Gremlins 2, you went right over to there.
Actually, Harry was before Gremlins.
Oh, it was? Okay.
Because I was on Ghostbusters when the phone rang in the shop, and it was Rick wondering when I'd be available to come down for Harry.
Oh, okay.
So we went down and did that. Is that right? No. That's wrong. Harry was after I got the call when I was on Howard. to come down for Harriet. You're right.
Yeah.
When I was on Ghostbusters, I got the call to go down to Gremlins. You're right. You had it right. I'm wrong. You know my career better than me.
No, I just have it in front of me. Your memory is a lot better than mine is. But no, and then Gremlins 2 you were able to work on, and you were in charge of everything again on that
No.
film?
No. This was wonderful and remarkable to me. This was the first and only time myself and Steve Sleep and Mark Tyler, my buddies from Jacksonville, all got to work together on the same show.
No way. That's awesome.
That was really fun. And no one was the supervising puppeteer. There were 3 supervising puppeteers, and that was us. That's why at the end of the movie, when the credits roll, and they did the technical crew, it's all these names that are in alphabetical order, except for Steve Sleep, Mark Tyler, and Tim Lawrence that are right at the top of the center crawl. They specially put us out of alphabetical order right there at the top.
That's so awesome, especially be able to, after 9-10 years in Hollywood, connect again on a film and all work together.
Yeah, it was great. I was Mohawk and the Brain Gremlin. I was the supervising puppeteer and the lead puppeteer for Mohawk and the Brain Gremlin. Steve was George. Mark was Lenny. Tom Hester was Daffy. Who's left? I'm missing somebody. Is that right? It's Mohawk. It's like name. Can you name all 7 dwarves?
Yeah.
Not today.
But that's great. That's so cool you were able to work all together again. And then it's funny, the next, there might have been something in between, but the next one that I see is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3.
Yeah, another big disappointment. I got to work with people I love on that, Lisa Sturs and James Murway. But here's the thing about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3. We were doing Splinter. I was the hands, Lisa was body and head, and James was the animatronic face. This was the first of those movies. They did not build the sets up off the ground so you could get underneath them. They thought that was too expensive, and Eric Allard, a wonderful guy and builds great stuff, said we can build it on the end of a pole and you can push it into the set. So I thought that really limited what it could do. But here's the thing. We were up there for Astoria for 3 weeks for this, and I guess the first week we didn't shoot, we just rehearsed. And then the day came and the call came, we're ready to shoot the first scene. Oh, okay. So it's inside the subway car where he's got that big overstuffed chair, and we had to push him in through the back of the set into the chair and get him positioned before we could do anything. And it's kind of tight and it's kind of squeezy and tricky. So we're back there and we're pushing him in and we're adjusting him and we're all ready and we've got our monitors set up and we're ready to go. So we say, okay, we're ready, and we hear cut, print. They had filmed it while we were putting him in place, and no one had noticed, and they just kept it, and I think it's in the movie.
Wow.
Putting him into place without even performing him.
That's insane.
It is insane.
Also,
it was very, very disappointing.
Yeah, and you know what's funny? So that's another movie that we're going to do, and I actually talked to Matt Hill. He was the suit actor for Raphael.
Ah.
He said he remembered you. He said hi.
Hi. I was understudy for, now I'm missing his name. He played the dragon in Ariel and the Bear in the Big Blue House. I can't remember his name, but I was understudy for that, so I got to rehearse and do some background stuff for his character.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
With the full controls.
Oh, for Raphael?
That sounds right.
Yeah. He said, his funny thing, he said that his, the guy that controlled him was the puppeteer for Snuffleupagus. So if that's the same guy.
Snuffleupagus, Martin Robinson.
That's what he told me.
Martin Robinson was the original Snuffleupagus. I don't know who was doing it at that time. Might have still been him.
Yeah. But no, he was like, oh, Tim. He goes, I remember him. He goes, I don't know if you remember me or not, but no, that's really neat. And then after that, because I don't want to take up too much time, really, thank you so much. These stories are amazing.
Sure.
And then you had the opportunity, you did the sculpting on Shrek.
I was part of that team, okay, Shrek's another long story. Shrek actually started in my garage. I had been working with a group called Propellerhead, 4 guys, Lawrence Soman, Andy Weisler, Rob Letterman, and another guy you might have heard of, J.J. Abrams. And they were developing new systems of animating characters. And their agent was CAA, Michael Ovitz. And we had gotten a deal with HBO to shoot a pilot, not a pilot, but a test for a late-night adult program called American Voyeur, and we designed this big fat character with a motion capture suit that I wore. So we used the motion capture to capture the body movement, traditional animation for peripherals like fingers, tongue, and eyes, and then replacement faces for all the expression. We digitized those expressions and then worked those into the animation. And how I got involved was because my friend Lauren liked what I had done for Beetlejuice, and he wanted to do something similar for this, so he brought me in on that. Well, after we finished the test for HBO went into turnaround. Our project got a red light, and it had been killed. But the agent, CAA, knew that Jeffrey Katzenberg had just acquired the rights to this children's book, Shrek, and was looking for a new process. So he sent our tape over. Jeffrey loved it, and we were immediately brought on to start developing Shrek, and began in my garage because that's all there was to work in.
Wow.
And as we got along, we brought more people in, like Tom Hester and Mike Smithson and Charles Rivera and Dennis Gordon, and just everybody worked on everything. And at some point I had to leave. I can't remember why, but I had to leave, and then Tom became the supervising sculptor, and he was the supervising sculptor for the rest of that show and all the ones that followed. And the Shrek that you see in the movie is Tom's design. Tom designed Shrek and the donkey. Tom designed every one of those when it comes down to it. Fiona, Shrek,
wow,
the donkey. That was all him. We all helped, because when these things start, the first thing you come up with is never the thing you use. And we must have gone through, because we worked on that for years. You know, I started working on the HBO project in '96, and when did Shrek come out? 2000. So there were years of development on that. So literally a couple of hundred stabs at the Shrek design, and until Tom was able to get it all together into a form that became what you see in the movie.
Yeah, and then at one point it must have been before he passed away, but Chris Farley did like a test.
And the very first sculpture that Lauren did was Shrek with Chris Farley's features, and I wish I could find that, but I'm not sure where that is.
Wow. That's amazing. Yeah, so you were able to work on those, and then, because they have you here as Shrek 2 sculptor and Shrek the 3rd mold maker and sculptor.
Yeah. Tom, we moved operations into Tom's personal studio, and that's where all the rest of it was done. That picture you have of us as a group is from Tom's studio.
Oh, wow. Nice. And then recently, the house with the clock on its walls.
No, I've had the what? No, I've had nothing to do with that.
Oh, really? Yeah, they have you on here for that.
The last thing I worked on was Apocalypto in 2006. I was in Veracruz for about 3 weeks, in the jungles west of Veracruz, in and out of Mayan temples with Mel Gibson performing and maintaining howler monkey puppets for the Zenote cavern sequence.
Wow. How was that experience, being down there?
The best thing for me was getting to watch Mel Gibson work. That's the hardest working director I've ever worked with. That guy's got energy. He knows exactly what he wants, and he knows how to get it across. It was just amazing. The set we were using, since it was some farm in a jungle, was a bunch of metal ocean-going containers that had been stacked into a big cube with a jungle translight on the top of it, and they used all of those metal, the 2 bottom metal containers as workshops, and inside was this cavern of Zenote.
Wow.
In the middle of a jungle. And out beyond that, they had built this huge miniature set of the city, which they would string green screens around and shoot the sun moving over it and the shadows moving and all that.
It's so amazing that you were able to work with him. And
I got onto that. My buddy Ted Ray got me onto that. he's really taken all of the special effects stuff much more seriously than I have, and has just really climbed. He got an Emmy last year for Game of Thrones, and I think that's what he's doing now. And he did Passion of Christ for Mel, and Apocalypto. He did the effects for Apocalypto, and the effects on Apocalypto are so good you don't even know you're looking at an effect. I mean, it's seamless all the way through.
Great. Well, thanks so much for your time. Just a couple more questions.
Sure.
What would you say you would be doing right now if you never got into this? Anything you wanted to be as a kid, career-wise?
Oh my goodness. Well, of course, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a veterinarian. I loved animals.
Oh, nice.
And that actually has led to what I am doing now. I have a not-for-profit. I have a not-for-profit that I call Conservation Arts, where I work with living zoo animals like gorillas, lions, tigers, bonobos, wolves. I'm in conversation with an animal preserve in Pantanal, Brazil, to go down later this year to work with the giant armadillos. And I go into the hospitals with them when they're unconscious for x-rays or blood work, and I use my kit to make molds off of their paws. So I make bronze art with Braille and English descriptions so people can see the animals with their hands. Because you and I can see these animals, but a lot of people can't. And this is a way to extend the animal experience and create this new interaction all through the park between the guests and the animals. And the site is conservationarts.net, and you can see what I'm up to.
Yeah, and I'll make sure to put that link in the description of the episode so people can check that out. It's really amazing that you're doing that.
There's nothing like putting your head on the chest of a 500-pound gorilla and listening to its heart skip, or a lion and hearing its murmur. It's really something. And often their eyes are open, and I'll just get right in their face and just stare into their eyes.
How long have you been doing this?
About 12 years. I got into it years ago with friends of mine at the Jacksonville Zoo. I know a lot of people at the zoo. It's my zoo. And that was an idea one day. We got a jaguar coming in. You want to cast a paw? Sure. Did that and just kept the relationship up, and it has now turned into this project, this program.
Well, that's amazing, Tim. And thanks again for your time. I'll make sure to include that link so people can check that out, especially with the amazing work that you're doing, that you're giving people an opportunity to feel and be able to see an animal without being able to see them.
I did an event last week called the North Florida Braille Challenge, where I took some of my sample exhibits down, and it was just really something to see these blind kids getting their hands on the crocodile paws and the wolf paws and the gorilla feet and reading the little Braille tiles that come with them. It's just something. Yeah,
no, that's so amazing that you took something that you learned and you were able to use for years to help. Make
that's my Hollywood techniques. I'm smearing alginate on gorillas.
Yeah. Well, Tim, thanks again for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, send me a link to where I can hear and listen to the cast.
Definitely. Thanks again,
right, man.
And have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, you too. Next time.
Those are some wild stories that I was not expecting going into it. I put the link to Tim's charity in the episode notes, but here it is. It's conservationarts.net. Now it's time for the trailer for next week's movie.
An evil crime lord is getting inside information.
We've suspected that there was a leak in this precinct.
It could be anyone.
Making us look like a bunch of fools!
Damn that.
Hightower. Hooks.
You can pick it up at the police impound yard. Boy!
Callahan. Tackleberry.
You'll take the bus and like it now, mister!
Jones.
Target human.
Backler.
Hey!
Harris.
Make my Christmas.
Or Commandant Lazard.
I know we shall soon triumph over our enemies.
They love their work. And it shows.
Woo!
When it comes to in-flight service and on on-the-job safety.
I have just the men for the job.
They're the biggest wheels around.
That was very exciting, wasn't it?
Police Academy 6, City Under Siege.
This was a fun one to do. And we had so many choices for sure, because Police Academy is amazing. But we went with the 6th installment. Check it out if you haven't seen it. And don't forget to subscribe to us, review, rate, and share our podcast. And hey, follow us on Twitter at Sequels Only. Give us some sequels to do. You send me some, tweet some at me. Hey, I'll reach out to all the actors in the movie to make sure that we can find somebody that we can chat with. Good night.